Hello and welcome to the Mommy Consultant. I am your host, Michelle Kay, and today we are going to have an interview that was actually from 2021. And so we're going to be talking about owning your maternal health. But before we get into that, I want you to understand that this is a space for exhausted moms who are filled with mommy guilt to move to being more mindful, calm, confident, and being able to create a legacy of wellness for you and your little one. And I want you to click subscribe right now to make sure you get all the latest videos from the Mommy Consultant. Now, as I said before, this video is from 2021 and it's actually from our Facebook group. Right now, our Facebook group is called the Mommy Consultant, but at that time, it was called Snatch Bag Mommies. So you'll hear some references from that time. But it's so important that we understand as women that we have to own our maternal health, be able to communicate that to our healthcare providers, to our partners, and even be able to communicate that to ourselves. So this video actually got cut off. The interview got cut off in the beginning. So we're going to kind of be in the middle of the interview. So hopefully you'll begin to hear the story that's going to help to motivate you and inspire you to put your maternal health first. All right, sit back and relax and check out our interview.
If you want your kids to be healthy, they need to be able to see that you're eating healthy, you're going to work out, and you're focusing on your health. You can't be a good mom if you're not around. And so you need to focus on being around for your kids long term.
Yeah. Yeah, we talk a lot about modeling that behavior. So, whatever that you are doing, your kids are constantly watching. And so it's really great that you bring that up, So sometimes it's hard a lot of times for our moms because we're doing so much.
It is hard. It is really hard. I mean, I think, especially as Black women, we quite honestly have a martyrdom complex. We take care of everybody else in the household and we're the last, and we get, what do they say, like the burnt toast idea? It's like, we'll give all the good pieces to everybody else and I'll take the burnt toast. Yeah. But at the end of the day, if you are exhausted, if you have nothing left to give, you are going to burn out. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And you also set up habits for your kids that, whether it's intentional or not, if you have a daughter, you're setting up habits for her to be that way when she's married or when she has kids in her life. And if you have a son, you're setting up dynamics for him to see that that's what his life should do. And that's not necessarily healthy either. You need to learn to put yourself first so that they understand, okay, this is mommy's time. They're going to be okay. Like, you're a good mom if you don't spend 24 hours a day focused on your kid. You got to leave some time for yourself. That's the only way you can be healthy.
Yeah. And you're right. Like, you will burn out, because a lot of our moms are not only, we're not only moms, but we're also working. We may have our partners, our family. We have so many things going on, and we really need to understand that we're just going to burn out if we're trying to put ourselves everywhere else. So it's so true.
And we're all guilty of it, and I want to stress that I didn't, wake up one day and say, oh my God, we all had to kind of learn how to share the load and trust in our partner. And I know, Michelle and I had these conversations with ourselves and then also with our little, text group where we'd say, girl, he's not going to do it the way you do it. Okay. So just kind of let go of that, because he's not going to do it the way you're going to do it. So you kind of have to just be like, I'm not seeing what I do, but that's okay. My kid's fine. Like, he'll get it done. That may not be the way I do it. And so it's like, there's a lot of trust that you think you have in your partner before you have kids, when you're like, oh, this is the whole level of trust that I got to release onto you to be able to do it your way. So it takes time, but you've got to learn to do it.
Yeah. I think you mentioned time because I was listening to your podcast, Not That Mommy, and you talk a lot about your journey. So why don't you just give us a moment about how this journey has happened into leading you to have your podcast, Not That Mommy?
Yeah, so it's been a long journey. So and I'll try to abbreviate it. As Michelle said, it's been about 8 years.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. It's been about 8 years, and looking back on it, it's all one continuum, but during the middle it kind of felt like different stages. But really it started, probably in my 20s. I always had extremely heavy periods and extremely painful periods. I can't really pinpoint like when that happened, maybe about mid 20s, but anyone who's suffered with any sort of heavy or painful periods, you just start to think that's how it is. Like, I mean, why? It's been happening for so long. Normal. You're like, oh, that's right. You don't really have a thought. And then, I go and I'm going to my annual physicals, and no one's really saying anything. They're like, yeah, I have a couple fibroids, but it doesn't seem like, we'll just keep an eye on it. And then, a job opportunity. At that time I was living in Atlanta, and then a job opportunity popped up for me in DC. And I don't know what made me think of it, but I said, as my parents have always instilled in me that if you go, you always try and go to like, a provider, like one of the top, if you have a chance to go to like a Cleveland Clinic or a Johns Hopkins, you go. These are research facilities, like research hospitals that are world renowned. You take advantage of it, right? So like, that's always kind of been what my parents have instilled in me. So Johns Hopkins was fairly close to our house, and I did some research, and they had a fibroid clinic. I said, worst comes to worst, they tell me I'm fine, and I've just made an appointment. I have insurance. Why wouldn't I take advantage of this facility? So I make an appointment, and I go in, and the doctor's telling me, well, I can't really do anything without seeing MRIs. And I was like, why would you need to see an MRI? My doctor's been telling me to have an ultrasound for years, and I'm fine. And she's like, you can't see anything with an ultrasound. She's like, I know you don't have kids, but if you see an ultrasound of when you're pregnant, you can barely make out shapes. Like, I need an actual MRI to see what I'm dealing with. So we get an MRI.
I think that's interesting because, and this is just one of the things that I was noticing when I was listening to your podcast, and I've known you for a long time, but you have built up such a medical like terminology and like knowing what things are. Like a lot of our women don't know, like they would know that clearly about an ultrasound.
I didn't. Most people don't. And fibroids disproportionately affect Black women. And so in Atlanta, just to back up a little bit, I was going to a fibroid specialist, right? Like I was going to someone because I knew I had fibroids, and I was like, oh, and she says, I'm fine. Like, don't worry about it. You're okay. And so I go to this clinic, and she's like, the first thing is we need an MRI, because I don't even know what I'm looking at, right? And I was like, wow, okay, I've never heard that before. So after dealing back and forth with my insurance, I finally get an MRI. We go into my doctor's office, and she goes, before I say anything, I just want you to look at this MRI. And I'm like, what am I looking at? And she's like, I'm seeing 2 fibroids. They're about the size of a 3-month fetus in your stomach.
That's so crazy.
And it was like, I was like, what? And it's crazy because if I think back on it, like I had started this like workout routine, this boot camp, and I kept telling my then boyfriend, I was like, I cannot get rid of this stomach. I was like, it looks like I'm pregnant, right? And I kept telling him
remember that.
And I was like, oh, this is so annoying. And so it turns out I did look like I was pregnant, because I had 2 fibroids that were making me look like I was pregnant. And so she said, we have to have surgery maximum 6 weeks from now, because you will never conceive a child with these fibroids in your stomach. And we're at the point where it's almost beyond laparoscopic, which means they can do it with robotics. It would be like a full-on like old school surgery where they like cut you open from like, your whole stomach, and they're like going in and having to do that, which is also lowers your fertility, right? Like dramatically. Yeah. So she's like, with robotic, like we can go in and we can try and limit the damage to your uterus. But if we have to pull gut, you're cutting into your uterus, right? So I was like, I mean, I don't feel like I have an option. So 6 weeks later, I'm having the surgery, and not only are these 2 huge fibroids in there, but they find clusters. So total 13 fibroids they find in me. And so they got him out successfully. Surgery was twice as long as they thought. It was a pretty terrible recovery. I've got to say, it's probably the most painful thing I've ever been through.
I know.
Yeah,
I remember that
time.
Rough. You were like, I cannot move. Like you know.
Yeah, it was pretty rough. And so, you know, recovery was about, I had to take short-term disability from work, and, you know, recovered. And my doctor said to me 2 things. She goes, you know, we'll test to make sure that your fallopian tubes are open, because that can sometimes be an issue with the surgery. And also you can never go into labor. So she's like, you always have to have a C-section. And she goes, if you ever have a doctor that tells you you can have a natural delivery, run out of that place. You should never. And I was like, I always remembered that, because that was sort of the beginning of me thinking, I need to manage my own history, because otherwise no one else is going to, I mean, they'll see your medical charts, but it's on you. You can't trust that your doctor knows everything about everything, because they don't. And you also don't know, you have to be an advocate and stand up and say, no, I can't do this. I need to schedule a C-section. You need to be able to say that. So,
and it's good that you had that. It's good that you had that doctor, because it seems like she was really knowledgeable. She was really there to help you. But you're right. Like, we don't always have that. And there's so many stories of that we don't have doctors who care, and or who are just looking at you and just look at you as a chart. It's just like, you know, whatever. So I like how you said that, really advocating for yourself and being knowledgeable.
Yeah, and you have to be able to understand when it's beyond your OBGYN, right? This whole situation was beyond an OBGYN, but instead of having a second look, I had to kind of take it upon myself to go to a specialist. This doctor I went to only dealt with fibroids. It was a fibroid clinic. So she knew what she was talking about on a level that no one I had dealt with before had. But my doctors that I dealt with before, you know, they're a jack of all trades. So they didn't really, you know all of that. But, you know, and so to kind of continue going, I you know, got engaged, got married. And my first son was sort of like I don't want to say accident, like I had believed that my doctor was like, oh, it's going to take you a while to get pregnant. You're going to have some fertility issues. And so I'd gone on birth control thinking it's probably going to take me 6 months, a year. Nope, my son was like conceived pretty easily. And so that kind of gave me false confidence that, you know, everything was okay and my body was okay. About 2 years into that, and when my son was about 2, we decided to try again. And I had an ectopic pregnancy, which honestly I'd never heard of till it happened. I didn't even know what that meant. But it is when the egg doesn't go into your uterus, it starts to grow in your fallopian tube, which it can't survive, and it actually can be fatal if not treated. And so one of the fallopian tubes from that surgery was blocked, and so the egg started to grow in it. And so usually the symptoms of that happen between 6 and 8 weeks pregnant, and you just feel, it's usually like a sharp pain. Like it feels like someone is like stabbing you. And which is, if you've ever been pregnant before, even if you're not, it's not normal. There's cramping, and then there's sharp pain. And then there's, you know, there's bleeding, and then there's bleeding. And it was bleeding. And so, you know, I went to my doctor. I knew something was wrong. And she's a Black female, which is something that I've only ever had women OBGYNs. That's just always been me.
I'm the same way. I just now have one primarily because of moving here. We both live in Palm Beach County, and everyone had recommended a doctor, and it's the doctor he's male, but he's a Black male. So I was like, at least it's either hitting either one. And then he had a woman on staff. But yeah, I mean, I'm the same way. And I think like for us women, we need to understand about, again, like advocating for ourselves, that it's important that we try to pick those doctors who are under the criteria that we would want to have. So whether it is like you said, like a woman doctor or a male, whatever you want, like
Right.
you deserve that. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
And that was important to me, was to have a Black female doctor. I'd kind of loosely started to look at statistics about, female, maternal mortality, especially as Black women in advocacy. And I just said, well, at least I know if I have a Black woman, she's going to listen to me. So I had gone to the doctor, and she diagnosed pretty quickly that I was having an ectopic. She's like, you're having an ectopic. As of now, I think that, we'll have you come back in 2 days, and we'll, have you take some medicine and see if that hasn't passed, because I really don't want to go the surgery route. So obviously devastated, leaving the office, driving back home, and I have a stabbing pain in the car where, quite honestly, by the grace of God, I got home. Like, I almost blacked out, but I got home. My husband was there, and I said, we got to go to the emergency room, because my doctor said to me when I left the office that if I have any more pains, I've got to come in, because that means that my fallopian tube is bursting, which is very similar to if you have like your spleen burst, you're going to die very quick. I mean, she was just very clear, because you're going to have internal bleeding, and that's it. So I go back to the ER, and I have a white male ER doctor who's like, I'm pretty positive you're having a miscarriage, right? And I said, I tell my doctor who's on staff here this morning, and she believes I have an ectopic pregnancy. And he's like, I think the likelihood of that is very low, but let's do, an ultrasound. Let's see what's happening. Till this day, I'm very confused about how he thought I was having a miscarriage, because if you're looking at my uterus, there's no egg. So how do you think I'm having a miscarriage when you don't even see anything in my uterus, right? Anyways, he's like, I think you're having a miscarriage. We're going to send you home in a few hours. And I said, Paige, my doctor. I said, this is my doctor. She's on staff here. Paige, my doctor. I need a second opinion. He was shocked. He was shocked, but that's my right as a patient to get a second opinion. And so he was like, okay, I'll do that. There was no way I was going to go home. She told me if I go home, I'm going to die. There was no way. So she came down, and she's like, okay, she's like, I'm going to prep you for surgery. You're going to go into surgery tonight. We got to remove this tube. And, he kind of came back in and was like, okay, so it seems like you're having an ectopic pregnancy and da-da-da-da-da. And, I don't care about people's feelings. That's not my problem.
No.
I'm here to try and live. I'm here to try and be around. And I knew what I knew from my doctor. And I think that's hard for a lot of women, to stand up to a doctor telling you one thing, but your body. And that was kind of the beginning of me thinking, like, okay, there's got to be somebody who stands up for people, because not everybody, Michelle knows me. I don't really have a problem standing up to anybody. I don't really give, to whatever. So this is just my nature. But I know it's hard for people, especially if you're not confident enough to think that you can tell a doctor something different. Yeah. But you have to know in your gut that you have a right to stand up for your advocacy and ask for a second opinion. So she came down and she said, we're gonna have the surgery tonight. I had the surgery, and they removed the tube. I don't remember much after, because obviously I was doped up, but my husband said, my doctor showed her the picture, and it looked like a bendy straw. He's like, that's how jacked up my tube looked. Wow. So, that was sort of the fertility issues and all. I know I'm taking a long time telling my story, but
no, I think this is, I hope you understand, and this is what usually happens with a lot of our moms. Like, there's a mom listening now, and she has either gone through this experience, or maybe is having fertility issues, or even a mom who's understanding that, wait, I didn't even think that maybe I can stand up to a doctor or ask questions. So your story is providing, for our women, for our moms, to just maybe think for a moment. And that's really why we are having this conversation. So, it's a journey.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot, and my husband and I, obviously, and I think the other thing that I would say was, it's really hard. And I think a lot of us who've gone through miscarriages or ectopic pregnancies, you feel as if you can't grieve the same way that somebody who actually had a live child. And so you kind of are like, well, I didn't know this baby. I didn't, like, and you just try to move on. And I think there's probably a lot of moms who understand that. And you don't let yourself grieve. And that was a really hard time because I didn't. I just pushed through, which was not great. And that's where I would say.
Yeah, we talked about that. We talked about that a little bit because I've always known you as being just so strong. And even through a lot of difficult situations, this whole journey, even talking with you, I'm always like, is she okay? Like I do the check, like the check-in as a friend, because we as Black women, I think, just have that tendency to just push through. And we push through, but there's so many things that that we're just holding on to. So I think that that's powerful, that you're understanding that, hey, like I tried to just push through and did what I needed to do. So.
And it always surfaces up. I mean, and I'm not just saying this because my best friend's a therapist, but it always comes back. It might not be there. I mean, it didn't come back to me probably presently till like a year later, but I was just like, I'm pushing through, I'm doing this, I'm just going to keep moving ahead. About 8 months later, went to see my doctor. She said, you guys have been trying for 6 months. Maybe you should consider IVF, which was like kind of a gut punch because I was like, oh, wow, this is the place we're at. So, I go through the IVF process. I'll spare you guys all the details about that. I can definitely talk about that on my podcast. You can hear all of that, but it didn't work out. And previous to starting it, my husband and I had made the decision we were only going to do 1 round. I'm glad we made that decision pre-IVF because I see a lot of people who get in the cycle. And I'm not saying that's good or bad, but it's hard when you're in it to make decisions because you're emotional, obviously, but you're also pumped full of hormones. So it's really hard to make a decision that's based, and I mean, I'm not trying to be sexist. You're literally pumped full of hormones. So every decision you're making is emotional. So the one thing I'll say about the IVF process is just decide before how far you're willing to go, because you can go really far down the hole financially, and then emotionally. And, unfortunately, I've known people who it's torn their marriages or their relationships apart. So just understand how far you're willing to go. So yes, it didn't work for us. And, kind of to skip to the good stuff, probably about 15 months, we moved to Florida for lots of different reasons, but, COVID happened and
I'm happy for
COVID happened.
I live in Florida.
Right. Yeah. We moved to Florida and, we decided that, I was not going to have another biological child. It just wasn't possible for me. So we started to explore adoption. And then COVID hit and we were like, okay, well, everything is so uncertain. Let's just hold off. Started focusing on my health and really just exercising and eating right, because I'm a bit of a control freak. And I think that helped in a very crazy world to focus on something I could control. But I noticed previous to that, I'm kind of jumping around a little bit, but that a lot of where I said it comes up, the emotions come up during that whole time between IVF and just the depression of having lost a child. I gained about 40 pounds. I didn't even see it come on at the time, to be honest. I just looked up one day and I was like, damn, I can't get into any of my clothes.
Yeah, we do not.
My face is fat looking.
Yeah, the gaining of the weight, we do not see it. We're just like, oh, wait a minute.
All of a sudden you're just like, whoa, this got really out of control really fast. And so, I was like, I got to manage this. And then I started to, work out, and it just wasn't really coming off because I was not eating right. Still, I was just exercising. And then, so with COVID, I was like, okay, it's got to be a dual plan attack. And I've also got to figure out ways to just focus focus on like consistency. So I started doing all of that. The weight started coming off. I started really paying attention to my actual health numbers and not the pounds on the scale. So what do my like labs actually look like? Like what do my cholesterol look like? All of the things that we don't really focus on.
We don't.
Started to realize vitamin D was really low, which, quick tip, Black women, check your vitamin D levels. They're probably fairly low. And that does not come back in a regular panel. That's a special panel you need to ask your doctor for.
Yeah. And that like attributes to so many things mentally. So there's so many things people don't realize with vitamin D is also connected with that. And so, and I think like, I like what you're saying because I've asked a lot of women, like, have you gone to the doctor? Like a lot of my clients, one of the biggest questions I ask is like, when's the last time you went to the doctor? And it's like 3 years, 4 years ago. And I'm like, you need to go at least, first of all, you need to have your OBGYN appointment, like once a year, your pap smear. And then you need to have a physical. And like what you're talking about is get your labs done when you have that physical. So we need to do that for ourselves.
Yeah, and you need to do the labs based as well on your medical history and your family medical history. So to that point, Michelle, it's so important. You know, one of my cousins, I found out yesterday, his wife just died of cervical cancer. She was 44, and it was cervical cancer that spread. Cervical cancer is something that you can find in a pap smear, and if it's caught early, you are fine. You are absolutely fine. But that's something that they have to find in a pap smear. And if you don't go for 3 or 4 years, that can lead to cervical cancer. Additionally, like my mom had thyroid cancer 20 years ago, so I always get my thyroid checked. And that's another one that if you catch it early, you're totally fine. She's been in remission for 20 plus years, but if they catch it late, it's almost a death sentence. So you've got to go and get these labs and understand your health. And then in terms of how you talk to your doctor about it, they'll run what they call a CBC panel, just a straight up plain metabolic panel when you go. Thyroid panel's different. Most Black women should just have that checked anyways, and whether you have the history.
I'll be honest, I haven't even thought of this. Oh, like, wait a minute, because I get my panel.
Yeah, you should have it.
I didn't even think about that.
You should have it checked because you might have an underactive or overactive thyroid, and sometimes that's just, if you've been gaining weight a lot, that could be the reason, and they can put you on simple medication and you could be fine. Vitamin D panel, once again, is totally separate, and that's also, like I said, a fertility, but it's also really important in COVID. They found that that might be the connection why Black people are getting COVID so much, is because we have low vitamin D, which is effective in our immune system. So those are just things that, you know, I've just learned to ask about. And then if there's anything else, ask your parents or your family members about any medical history, just so you know. I mean, I just turned 40, so now I have to start doing mammograms. Like,
I know,
it's a whole new world. Like, you need to start doing mammograms.
I know. I turned 40 this year. It's the same thing. I'm just like, there's so many things that I need to make sure I'm doing for myself. And like you said, it's also, we have to ask, and sometimes we have to demand. So it's like not only like asking, and they're like, no, you don't need that. No, I do. Like, I'm paying it. And you know, I think like when we think of insurance, I know so many women who will have insurance but haven't gone to the doctor for several years. And a lot of these things are covered. Like your pap smear is covered. Like,
it's covered.
So
it's fully covered. I mean, think about it. I mean, and it's just from like, you know, even from that perspective, like you said, if you have insurance, it's like, why would you put insurance on a car that you never drive? It makes no sense.
I know. It's true.
You know?
It's true. I think about that. I like that. Yeah. It's so true. So
yeah. But anyways, I know I talked a lot about this, and I don't want to go into any more of the history because it's something that you guys can find, you know, and I'll offer this at the end, but I have an ebook on my website, which is totally free. I talk about all of this so you guys can understand the full story, and also on my podcast so you guys can listen to part, and it's separated into parts. You don't have to listen to the full biography, but I know Michelle had some questions for me, so I'll definitely, we can move on to that.
Well, I think like I actually want you to think about what your journey is like currently. So I think I actually love like your story, but I want you to think about if you can just talk about like what you're experiencing like right now, in terms of your bundle of joy
Yeah.
come in. So I
Yeah.
think like
So,
that's a good part of your story that I don't want to leave out.
okay. So I am 34 weeks pregnant now. And, after all of this, it was literally a miracle that I got pregnant. But this was also a very tumultuous pregnancy. Like with my first son, it was so easy and I took it for granted that would be easy. When I found out I was pregnant, I was like beyond shocked. And then, I've had challenges throughout. I had a really sort of rough diagnosis in the first 11 weeks. Once again, by a doctor who didn't really, I don't know what the word is, take the time to educate, quite honestly, herself. I mean, if I'm being totally frank, on how to talk with patients. Because there's a lot of that as well. So I have a dual system at my doctor now. Once again, I have another Black female doctor, and she's an OBGYN, but she employs perinatologists, which are, high level, like, or you might also hear maternal fetal medicine doctors. So those are doctors who deal with high risk pregnancies. And it's a whole facility of people, but she basically diagnosed my baby at 11 weeks with some sort of, and I don't want to go into all the medical terminology, but basically she looked at an ultrasound. Ultrasounds are always going to get people into trouble, let me tell you, and said, okay, your baby, the chances of your baby not having, some serious problems is almost zero, and you should probably talk with your husband about termination options. And I was like, what? And
I remember you were, like, calling me, texting me, and I was just like,
I mean, it was one of those things
I had to bring Jesus. I had to bring Jesus in this conversation. I was like, you don't know.
I know.
Like, we do not know. You do not know what will happen for you.
And that's the thing. It's like, obviously it's so emotional when you hear that. And I got home and my husband was like, why are you taking her word for it? You research everything. Yeah. Like, go research what the hell she's talking about, see if that doesn't even make any sense. And then when you go to your actual OBGYN on Friday, talk to her about it. So, when I kind of stepped back and like did the research, I found out that, this is one step. Like, you look at it this way, if you see something concerning, then you move on to the next step. And then it's a blood test. And then it's like 3 steps down the road. And she just took this one step and said, okay, let's talk about termination. So I got on Friday and she was up Friday. Yeah, it was very premature, and she didn't know what she was talking about, to be quite
crazy. You're a doctor.
Yeah. And she was, I did my research on her, and I did my research on what she was talking about. She had been an actual practicing doctor for like 2 minutes. And what I mean by that, she literally had been in that office for 18 months. So she was by far the youngest doctor. So you would think she would have brought in a veteran to kind of check her work, essentially. And my actual OBGYN called the head of the practice pissed. Like, she was pissed. Because she's like, you don't say that to a patient. Like, what are you talking about? We have to. And so my doctor went through, you've got to do this, you've got to do that, we've got to do this. So essentially throughout the pregnancy, we've been testing. I have an ultrasound every month. Some points I have had them 2 weeks. I had to have an amniocentesis, and usually, that's when they kind of stick in a very thin needle into your stomach to test the liquid. Sorry, my actual terms are in.
That's
so the fetal sac, the fetal sac, to see if there's any abnormalities. So and that's kind of like the definitive answer after all of these other tests. I mean, I had multiple blood tests, and everything kept coming back like negative. Then we had this amniocentesis just to rule out anything. And that was at 24 weeks, 25 weeks.
Okay.
And that's like 99% accurate that things are okay. And came back and thank God everything was good. But it was one of those things where, I mean, I wasn't telling anybody. I think Michelle and my family knew, and that's it. Because we were so scared to hope, you know, we were so scared to hope and share and what was going on. And so, you know, I wasn't showing very much early on, so it looked like I was gaining weight again. Everyone's like, oh man, she just lost all this weight, it's getting big again. So, you know, I wasn't sharing, I wasn't telling anything. And that was like one of those moments where I was just like, you know,
I feel like when, like for you and like a lot of women who are going through this process, like it is so hard. It's like you're holding on to all these thoughts, everything going on. And it's kind of like you want to share, you want to tell people, but like you said, you can't. It's difficult. And so you know, you're right. You might have to keep that in your circle and keep it with like a certain amount of people to really talk about that through until maybe after the experience. So
right. Yeah. And that's what we did. So, you know, everything came back negative and, you know, we're at 34 weeks here, almost the end, and having a little boy and everything looks perfect, but it was scary. I mean, but once again, it's the same lesson that I kept coming back to, which made me want to talk about Not That Mommy. And that kind of leads into why I wanted to start it, was because I didn't want to just pop up on Instagram or Facebook one day and say, oh my God, I'm pregnant. Like we planned to wait 5 years in between our kids. Like this was all just like a plan and everything looks beautiful. I wanted to let people understand like what was really going on, because I knew I couldn't be the only one who had been suffering through all of these things. And I wanted to be real about it. So I thought about when I was going to announce, like, what do I want to accomplish? I don't want to just be on Instagram. And so I thought about, well, I want to have a community where women who are suffering with infertility, trying to understand what's even happening to their bodies, maybe going through IVF and don't even really understand what the doctor's talking about most of the time, or having, you know, in the middle of their pregnancy and just feel so confused or lost or stressed or suffering with loss. And then even the transition to motherhood, like, you know, transition to motherhood, if you're a working mom, is so different. I wanted them to have a place to talk and share and, you know, be open with each other. And so I started this blog and then started this podcast. And honestly, within the first few days, I was floored by how many, not just people, but like close friends and family who reached out to me, not only publicly, but privately, had ectopic pregnancies and almost died, people who had almost the same diagnosis about fibroids that I did, where somebody said, oh, you're fine. And then they ended up in an emergency room having emergency myomectomy surgery. Like I had a friend tell me that she had an emergency myomectomy while she was living abroad in Australia because she was having crippling back pain. And they said the fibroids are starting to wrap around your spine. And these things that people just, it's so scary that people are just so unaware of because they're trusting that their doctor is, you know, is absolute. And I'm not telling you not to trust your doctor. That's not what I'm telling you. I'm just telling you to understand your own health, understand what's happening in your body. If things don't feel right, you can demand a second opinion. You can just go to a different doctor. You can ask questions, because at the end of the day, you're responsible for your own health. Your doctor is not.
Yep. I love that. Like, I really want to quote that, like put that somewhere. You should take that quote and put it up there. Because it's so good. And this is the reason why we're having this conversation. We really want to let people know to own your own health, really get that second opinion, and just don't take, you know, of course, like you said, listen to your doctor, but, you know, it's your body. And it's important that we understand that. So, well, we're out of time. Oh gosh, such great conversations. I love it. Well, why don't you kind of give us a moment and let us know where where we're supposed to get everything, your Instagram, website, everything. So where can they look for Not That Mommy?
Yeah, so you can go on Instagram at Not That Mommy. That's my handle, or Tamara T. Owens. And then on my website, notthatmommy.com. And then the podcast you can find really anywhere, on Anchor, on several platforms, Not That Mommy, and get more information. If you go to the website, sign up for my newsletter, you'll get a free copy of the ebook where I talk in more detail about what I've been talking about here. And that's really my focus, is to just bring these conversations up and make sure that women feel supported, especially Black women. We are 4 to 5 more times likely to die in childbirth than white women. And so, no one knows why that is, but I think we all probably kind of know why that is. And so you have to make sure you advocate for yourself so that you can be around for yourself and your family.
Yeah. All right. Great. Oh, thank you so much for coming on Snatchback Mommies. And please, everyone, go to Not That Mommy. We're going to post the link below to website, everything, so that you can get that information really quick. But again, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was fun.
I know. All right, everyone. Have a good day.
Bye.